let's start. Well, we start as usual with the question about who is good student and who is becoming a good student. And I just want to remind you that the good student is the one who read the entire article, and becoming a good student who maybe knows who is the author, or maybe just the title, or look through the references, or maybe don't even know all of that.
What about
but there's a lot of room for improvement.
Would you call somebody a good student who wants to destroy this article?
That's another story. This is a response. We will move to that next. First, this kind of familiarity with that. So, do we have all of us are good students? I'm a good student.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, very much.
Okay, so we're all good students. Good. Well, it's actually bad, because if we had becoming a good student, we would, that person will
Let's
be
quickly invite somebody to come.
Yeah, responsible for asking stupid questions like what the article is about.
Yeah.
Since we cannot do it, which is usually a good question, because like people will probably, all four of us will see different things. Okay, well, I don't know what you would like to talk about that. Who wants to start?
Start.
Anna, you want to start?
I can start. I can say that I'm responsible for bringing this article in remotely, because I mentioned it when I first found it a few years ago to Eugene. I liked the title very much, but when I started reading, my liking sort of cooled down. But I still think in some ways it's important article, because it focuses attention to the problem that we very often see, that on the outside form something may look like maybe dialogue, but it's not really a dialogue. So that you can say in one sentence like this. The way they do it maybe is not something that I'm very hot about, but I think this is a merit of it, that they kind of like focus larger audience attention that there is such a thing. That not everything that looks like a duck is a duck.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I found it interesting. He seems to bring up some of the key elements that I think I found in my own kind of understanding of that. One of which is this sort of distinction between what I think would be kind of a genuine ontological dialogue about, let's say, floods, versus what I saw this teacher doing in this article, which was engaged in a preset discussion already of what a flood is, but doing it in such a way that the focus is purely on abstract definitional issues. What is a flood? As if that by itself, one of the things that strikes me is that that's a very complicated question. And the kids keep bringing up all these other things that throw off the discussion of what is a flood, bringing up hurricanes that the teacher didn't expect, bringing up things that, as is talked about in the article, disrupt the, quote, thematic continuity or the coherence of the dialogue. And I found a couple instances where there were some wonderful golden moments that could have emerged out of this dialogue, particularly when the discussion talked about the hurricane. And the teacher had an interesting opportunity there. She started talking to the kid about the hurricane, and the kid started talking about how hurricanes cause floods. And the teacher said, well, wait a minute. The primary problem and the primary destructive element of hurricanes is wind. And I said to myself, wait a minute, that's not true. Because hurricanes, most people die in a hurricane because of flooding. And that the flood emerges after the hurricane. And that's the thing that kills people. It's not the wind. And the kids seem to be interested in the destructive element of it and that sort of thing. And all of that is just kind of washed away because the general goal of that dialogue is for the kids to reveal the definition that the teacher already had about what a flood is. At least that was the impression that I got from that. But I thought that was an interesting. I appreciated that.
Okay, let's continue, Tina. Like what you like in the article?
Yeah. Actually, I agree with both Anna and Mark. It was my reflection to start with. I'm seeing with Anna in that I don't like the way, if we're speaking about the methods they use and this ethnography, I don't think it's ethnography, and I think it's like more.
No, Tina, you start talking about what you don't.
Sorry. Yeah, but as Anna said, I don't like the way, but what I liked is exactly what she brought up. How to problematize dialogue and voice, of course. For me, I think it was an interesting way, and also not only how they theorize it and how they link it to exactly those classrooms dialogues. And I was positively surprised because I also like, do you know what I like most? Most of all in this, to me. Finally, it was the first article that brings up the problem of just implementing ground rules, the Cambridge School and the communicative ground rules, the ID. And this article actually shows that such rules can't do the magic. I think they wanted to show it explicitly, So that was what I liked, that they discussed this, that you can't just have them to talk in frequency or, just encourage students to talk. It's how they are talking. And they also wanted us to further research the processes and the power conditions around the voice and dialogue. So I think they came up also with, I can talk about them later. I noticed some good questions they asked. I think they put good questions and sometimes distinctions also. I can wait.
Okay. What I like about that, which is, I think, a little bit on Tina, but I'm much less excited as Tina is, but I have similar liking. I like that this is probably, from what I've read, first critique of this, what I called functional structural discourse analysis or discourse approach, not even analysis, but discourse approach to dialogic pedagogy. But of course, it's coming from another discourse, functional structural discourse analysis. Instead of like what Tina is saying, it's showing that the rules bad, but they creating new rules and thinking that that will save. It's about how. Tina likes that, I don't like. Let's focus on how dialogue is.
Yeah, of course.
Without anything about meaning making, which is what, in a way, Mark, you were talking about. But I like that critique. This is, I think, first critique coming within the same kind of approach. But what they're trying to do is to improve, to patch actually these rules. Now we need two rules for the voice. Like before it was rules, this is the ending of the article, remember? Like before it was rules for the talk. Now we need to create rules for the voice, which is is the same bizarre idea, and we don't see how what they're proposing is, that's the problem. Their approach is the problem. It's not implementation of this approach. It's the approach itself is the problem. So now we can open for like whatever we criticize, whatever. It's just like a good idea to start what we like. And again, I also agree with Anna that the best part of the article is its title.
Okay, I went and looked at, you said that the title comes from somebody else. And it's true, at the very beginning, they quote some guy. Actually, I downloaded his book, Rampton, 2006, and I looked at where does he express something like that. And he doesn't, actually. So he only uses the word exuberant. actually over exuberant. So this guy Rampton's book is now in our e-library, and it's called Language in Late Modernity, Interaction in an Urban School. And that may be a very interesting book because it really is an ethnography. It has a lot of examples and very kind of unusual approach, but I don't want to now digress. So he talks about over-exuberant boys and how teachers very often in a dilemma between letting those two groups of children, over exuberant children that always want to say something, that everything that they were very engaged, over exuberant, and other children who just don't speak at all. And so for teachers it's sort of easier to fall back on the children who are ready to speak. That's his idea of Rampton, so he talks more about that. So they took this over exuberant or exuberant, and then they tried to use the Bakhtinian analysis of voice, which I don't agree with their choices of quotes or the way how they describe what is voice. To a certain degree, yes, but very shallow. And that's one thing. Another thing is that this choice, their methodological choice of schools, comes because they already had collected data in many schools in Israel. But these schools are not at all anything to do with the dialogic approach. They're really progressivist schools, or have progressivist agenda together with a very prescribed curriculum. They even talk about scripted teaching or teacher script. Like she needs to teach about floods, which are flash floods in the deserts. That's her humor. And she wants to just lead them there. So she is not a dialogic teacher, not expects any dialogue. She is a very traditional type of teacher where she uses children's replicas just to fit into her scenario that she has. So from the first moment, it's not a very interesting, actually, it could be interesting if the teacher wanted to develop a dialogue about floods, but that's not what her orientation is at all. So their data kind of like also pulled them down in their possibilities to analyze what the children here just play the regular school children, students who know how to follow the scenario of a regular classic class. That's all.
Anna, but I disagree with you respectfully, because they talked about that these teachers explicitly teach kids this rule of engagements, and this is your judgment. But from point of view of the Cambridge things, this is exactly what they recommend to do.
Exactly, but I think it's a part of like adding to the to this any other scripted teaching, like what the teacher needs to, like at the end of the class, the students will know, plus these rules of engagement that you don't.
But again, so what?
I want to add to what Shirley said, or I agree.
But this is exactly part of the Cambridge recommendations.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. By the way, the Cambridge recommendation do not go against teaching preset curriculum. You can see Rupert actually presented that. It's very clear that they actually about that.
Yeah.
At least some wink of that. I don't know. I cannot talk about all everybody. So I disagree with you. This is exactly what considered to be good education, a good dialogic pedagogy, because there is a rule of engagement, there is inquiry there, what is flat, there is an point there, which is again, many of these Cambridge kind of things, they were okay with that, instrumental.
Right. Yeah, well, it's
and that's exactly they for that aiding. They fine with traditional teaching, but for that you need to add this rules of the talk. That will lead to this. There should be inquiry. Inquiry is there. What is flat, right? There should be rules of engagement. They're there. You know, let me add to what somebody said before. All of this there.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the
exploratory talk.
instrumental view of dialogue to kind of like animate, and they see always this interanimation.
No, they don't animate. They actually enact that. I don't think I disagree with you. They enact the spirit of what they wanted.
Yeah,
That's exactly what they want.
that's true.
It's not deviation from that. It's exactly what they want. They want traditional things, but there is exploratory talk, there is inquiry going on. Yeah, they might disagree that maybe teachers talking too much, but that's another story. That's not very important in my view.
Yeah, I think what Anna's getting at, and I hear it in your voice about inner animation. I was the earlier discussion of the author's interpretation of Bakhtin and the use of inner animation of voices as kind of like one, that the student's voice is one voice among many and this kind of thing. And I actually found that, in my view, it's not very interesting interpretation of Bakhtin, but I was interested in the way in which it was framed and what it was missing. And I found it helpful to their interpretation of that, looking at it from the point of view of the inner animation either coming from the authoritative voice, right? And they had an interesting comment in there about how we're not sure if in inner animating the authoritative voice, if the kids are actually engaged in Vygotsky mediation, they said, or monologic silence, which I thought was kind of an interesting point. And then also this, the other possibility is that the inner animation would emerge in the extracurricular underlife. And I've seen that argument before, and it's kind of interesting to see it here, that those are the two possibilities that are seen there in terms of what could happen as a result of these voices of the students, I guess, animating, as they call it, the discourse about flooding. It either goes into the underlife or it becomes part of a authoritative voice, and it doesn't really emerge into anything, else. And I was a little bit. I was also interested in the literature review and who they were citing. The importance of thematic continuity and the cumulative nature of dialogue. I think they're stuck there because they don't see the possibility of the emergence of the new and the emergence of the thematic change in thematic focus, which I think is essential for dialogue. I mean, we don't go around talking about, imagine if all four of us were discussing this article, but we had to stay on one thematic focus. It would kill everything we're trying to do. And of course, it's going to result in an absolute disaster, but that's exactly what this teacher is doing. Continually pushing the discussion back to the definition of flooding, which, if you really think about it, and I don't remember where I read this from, I'm sure I heard it somewhere from one of you, but this idea that defining what a flood is an extremely difficult thing that probably would require a PhD in some kind of weather pattern to be able to really effectively do. But we do this all the time with kids. We ask them to define things. And of course, they're going to bring up what they know. And of course, they're going to bring up issues and problems that become very interesting. But if the focus goes back on the definition, it kills it.
But Mark, don't you think the authors are very clear that they're problematizing exactly this, how the teachers? Okay.
Yeah, but I just don't think that the analysis is enough. I think that they're caught up in that.
Okay, do you think the mix Bakhtin, and I wonder if that could be a problem with Himes? I don't know this author Himes. Do you know?
Himes, yes. Yeah.
Could that be the problem? That it's not only Bakhtinian. It's
no. Himes was talking about cultural patterns of speaking, about the ways of understanding the others from their own cultural point of view, trying to, it's not, and they don't use much of Heims either. They just use some kind of pragmatic approach, that's all.
Okay.
In their
And in my view, there is, again, I disagree with Anna because I think there is a problem there. But Heims, in my reading, is structuralist and cultural structuralist.
Linguist, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. But I thought that they were using more his pragmatic of interpreting.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It is pragmatic, but it's constantly. The thing is, part of this, in my view, problem, of course, they're functionalists and structuralists, and Bakhtin was not. And of course, that creates a huge problem. But that's why they're, in my view, all the quotes contrived, including Alexander quote of the Bakhtin, because they see constantly structuring function there, which is Bakhtin is primary responsible for that, and that's I see that the problem in that as well. But in a way, also I agree to somebody to Anna, because it's not the problem in Heims. The problem is that they're even reading Bakhtin from the lenses, structural, functional lenses. And that's, in a way, Heims, it's not Heims, they might not use Heims at all, but it doesn't matter, in a way, because the lenses that they have, it's a structural, functional lenses. And that's why what they see.
Is that why they...
Huh?
Is that what, this structural lens is why they get attracted to that notion of interanimation?
Potential.
Yeah. But again, everything, like, looking at the pattern, they're talking about pattern recognition. Even this whole article is a pattern recognition. You found another pattern. I'm nothing against that. But it's a very limited way, and it will be very good if it will be supplemented or actually embedded, better to say, in the meaning making, but they're not. And actually, Mark, let me go on opposite direction, what you talked about that. You criticize teaching. I want to criticize researchers. And I want to criticize researchers. Let's assume what they proposed. And we'll see what the different interesting things, problems will come with that. So imagine that the teacher will embrace everything what the kids were saying. Surrogates, whatever. What immediately, another problem will immediately emerge. There will be a lack of theme, anything. Because it will be just the bubbles of this kind of things. Kids, without teacher, kids might find something or might not. The reason why they might not because they are inept or whatever, but just because who cares about these floods? Honestly, like these floods, some coming out of nowhere, what for teacher? For teacher it's coming because he needs to teach that, but that's not a reason actually to discuss floods. Right. Because she doesn't care about herself either about floods.
Right.
Neither kids, maybe and this is why there is a possibility they may find something if somebody really interested in something about floods, like for example, about the violent nature or something else. If they find something interesting, which is possible, and something will emerge, but possibly not, if they're not very interested in floods, okay, bubble, boom, that's it. It's just because there is, again, there is no focus on meaning making. There is no focus on, we're talking about power. Like, power of what? Power of deciding your own education. Where is that power? There is constantly bizarre reference to democratic something. What democratic there?
Nothing democratic there. That's what bothered me the most. They are constantly telling that the teacher has democratic values. Where do you see democratic values here?
Yeah, but I think they are aware of the problem. I think the whole article is about to discuss the limits of this democratic teaching ground rules.
I don't think there is a problem discuss democratic. They just assume that they don't want to discuss anything. They don't problematize. They never define what democratic is. They never problematize what it is. they never ask like how it should be, even democratic. It's not democratic. It's just.
And the students there don't have any power of decision of anything. They have the only power of decision is to whether they will participate or not and what they will say in that particular instance within the whole context where if they would say suddenly, I like candy, that would be like, you're disrupting the class.
Right. Okay, go ahead, Tina.
No, I just think, are we talking about the author level, the researcher level, or talking about? Yeah, I think we stay.
That's where we're talking about, because Mark was talking on the teacher level.
That's confusing because I mean
now it's researcher level. Yes, the good news, like for me, the only possible things that article might bring, they're calling for actually chaos, and this is good.
Calling for what?
There is a Trojan horse there. It's a chaos because they basically let's kids say how they want to say. Okay, let's do that. That will bring a lot of, in my view, chaos, which is good, but because it's a little bit, it push even further for kind of attack on the power, institutional power. But my expectation that people like Vegrev and some other will immediately jump and say, stop that, this is chaos, this is violence, let's kill violence with another violence, let's get rules on the topical rules on that, and go back to that. I kind of like the call for let's free student voice, but of course they want to free under very strict implicit conditions.
Very strict.
Which is they don't want to say what it is. Because, of course, it's okay, with them, it's okay to discuss floods out of blue. Like, you come to, and let's talk about flood. Like, I just imagine, like, Adam and Elise, somebody comes to them and say, let's discuss floods. And get very upset if they don't want to do that. But they think it's okay to do with the children. Because children are captive there, and you know, but you need to decide floods, but in your own voice.
Well, they, as you say, they come very near, but never actually break through with this, trying to really confront that the democratic and dialogic way of schooling would be completely disrupting. So they, at the end of whatever is that page 11, at the end of that first second paragraph, says, however, it does help us to understand the teacher's script and the democratic and dialogic ideals that motivate and ultimately undermine it. So I don't know where they saw that the teacher's script is motivated by democratic and dialogic ideals, except that ideal is that all these rules of dialogue that were prescribed by the ministry very strictly.
Anna, can you please tell me it's in the middle or I'm trying to find?
Okay.
Yeah, I can't find it.
I cannot find it.
Last sentence before the subtitle appropriating the student's voice, like she said.
We don't have that.
11.
And we
it's 12. Isn't it 12 on the PDF?
Maybe I have a different copy than you do.
No, it's page 12. We're talking about page of the article, not page whatever you have. It's
okay.
Okay, I have some different copy than you do, which is not really printed article, but from their website that I downloaded a long time ago.
Again, Anna, and please.
We couldn't find it.
So, can you find the subtitle called "Appropriating the"?
Yeah, it's right. It's right on page 12. Yeah.
Where is that appropriating?
It's subtitle.
Like section 2.
Yeah, we have that. Yeah, all right.
12 in
yes.
The sentence before that, in the previous paragraph. However, it does help us to understand the teacher's script and the democratic and dialogic ideals that motivate and ultimately undermine it.
Okay, fine. The last sentence.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so to me, it was like, what are they talking about? That the teachers is motivated by democratic and dialogic ideals, except if they agree that those ministry rules about the dialogic engagement is a dialogic ideal. But what
No, I think they agree with that.
Yeah, they say ultimately undermine it. I think they also have a critical attitude.
contradiction, but it's very, very kind of like better not touch it. It's kind of
But still, I don't understand where is democracy there.
exactly. I don't see any democracy.
No, but they don't see it either, I think.
No, they see it. They constantly see it throughout the paper. They talk about democratic presumptions.
Is democracy equated with students' access to the floor?
Probably, I don't know.
Of that.
I don't know.
You know, like they have this table, and I honestly I couldn't understand why they did their analysis until now. But maybe the idea is that you know, students get the floor. That is democratic.
No, I think they say that it's not enough, but it's a part of the method to.
No, not part of me. I think, Mark, I agree with you. I think because it's exactly following after that table, they say the focus group data reflect the stated allegiance. So it is support for the stated allegiance or a perceived policy environment that demands constructivist principles and democratic dialogic intelligence.
So what these rules have an ideology. They say it's democratic dialogic approach. If you let the students have the floor.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I understand what you mean.
That's
yeah.
Their definition or their idea of democracy, that the students can talk a little bit more in the class.
But I think it's like this. They are talking about. They are discussing two levels of what they think is democratic dialogue. Could we say that? And this, and they don't think this level is enough. So in the end, they problematize.
No,
they don't. No.
Yeah, but I have another place that I like that they say. We see if I have a page number, but then they're discussing Bakhtin and this authoritative discourse, and on some place they say that let the classroom be focused on experimenting with the official discourse and allowing for this IPD or a more an even more democratic.
You know, I think that people use the word democratic very loosely. There is nothing democratic about. Democracy is about how it's a way to impose decision making on people who dislike that decision. It's a one way to do that. Just a sec. By majority vote. That is what democracy is about. It's nothing to do with dialogue. Dialogue and democracy is completely two different things, and they sometimes going against each other.
Yeah, but sorry, I think this part I am referring to was about voice. So it's the concept of voice, and it implies democracy. So I was wrong when I said, I don't think they said democracy explicitly, but I mean that they are coming to this, that they are discussing two levels of democratic dialogues whatsoever, I think. I don't think the teachers level and this program of the school, I think they don't think it's enough to just encourage such dialogues. Yeah. They have a critical attitude to it.
Yeah, they don't think it's enough. On the other hand, they're really hiding or covering up, or they themselves very fuzzy from themselves what the real problem is.
That could be. Of course, yeah, they are loose and vague and.
No, it's not they vague. They think still you need to just find the right rules and everything will be fine.
No.
They're within paradigm of the Cambridge paradigm. They want
but they don't like it.
No, they like it. They like approach. They don't like particular rules. they think it's not enough. By the way, they like the rules. They just don't think it's enough. They need new rules for the voice.
Are you sure?
Yes, look at the ending of the article, the last sentence of the article.
Okay.
And that's the complexity of dialogicity. Wait, it says here,
Yeah.
in addition to raising these and other specific questions, the study highlights the complexity of dialogicity in a classroom setting and suggests that future work on dialogue, focus much more closely not on processes of talk, but also processes of voice.
But also, so this one is good. It's just not enough.
Exactly. And
It's just not enough. There is new things necessary to do. It's now rules of the voice. Before it was rules of the talk. Now
that's a good
rules
point.
of the voice.
But this whole paragraph, the last paragraph, is very problematic when you start and say, we have further seen that dialogic imperatives may come into conflict with each other. Democratic and constructivist principles can play an ironic role in suppressing realization of voice. So they equate democratic and constructivist principles, which is...
Uh,
I was confused as well. Yeah, I noticed that.
And then
I don't think they equate them. I'm not sure they equate them, but they feel what's called democratic. It's very bizarre thing.
Right.
By democratic, they mean like giving a floor to people, which is, in my view, nothing to do with democracy.
Exactly.
Democracy can be with that or can be without that. Democracy is a way of imposing decision making. The decision making here is imposed by the teacher without any democratic decision making.
Yeah, exactly. And they
and probably it's not even teacher who imposed that, but it's institution and government, the Ministry of Education, whatever. There is no democracy there whatsoever.
No.
No, exactly. But
no democracy and
because there is no decision making. This is what because democracy is about, it's a politics. It's a way of organizing politics. There's no politics there. The politics here, I mean, in that sense, it's autocratic. There's only policies autocratic. It's the imposition of the tapping top down, and that's it. And masses or demos, there is no demos there in that sense, because demos is not allowed. It's powerless. Demos is powerless.
Yeah. Can I?
Something puppet here that says now you talk like puppets for the students. This puppet does this, that puppet does that. Everything has to, and the students are willing puppets. That's all. In this, they are not free to do something what they would be interested in.
No. Again, the free is about decision making. There is no decision making.
Exactly.
The possibility for decision making, it's not legitimate in that classroom at all, and not in the classroom that the authors proposed either. Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Can we look at the, you know, I'm so engaged in this passage on page 5 because I think it's a, and they start with a question. It's beyond the quote. Is it first they have a quote?
Which one?
The beginning of that.
Page 5.
Ah.
I have different pages, so tell me how it's.
Yeah, first there is a Bakhtin quote. Can you find it? Consciousness awakens, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, that's
probably page 4. You're page 4.
Page 4, perhaps, Anna. And after, they have an interesting, because first they ask a question, and then they put forward 2 alternative answers, and they chose an answer that I think, or an alternative, I think it's good. Let's look. First they said, in Bakhtin's account, can you read that?
What is it in Bakhtin's account? Yeah.
The immersion in and assimilation of authoritarian discourse is a precondition for the development of interpretive persuasive discourse.
Yeah,
this is very bizarre reading of Bakhtin, but it's okay.
But then they put this question: what are the implications.
They take that as a premise. So what are the implications of such account for the classroom?
Which is, I disagree with the premise, but
Yeah,
it's
I
okay.
disagree with this.
Okay, and then now they come up with one, very, in my view, very bad interpretation, and after that they have a good one, I think. What do you think?
Which is where?
Yeah, we just continue. One possible.
Yeah. One
One
possible
possible
interpretation is
interpretation.
to accept that school is necessarily a site of authoritarian imposition, 1884, writing in a very different era and socio-political conscience seems to assume as much, and that students struggle against this imposition and the consequent development of the independent voices will take place in extracurricular spaces. Another interpretation which we advance here is that the classroom can become a place in which students are allowed and even encouraged to begin to experiment with official discourse, struggle against it, and ultimately reproduce it in their own accent and in a fashion that serves their own purpose.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I just wonder what you don't like.
Well, that reminds me of the research I did on bullying. You know, the idea being, or actually not even that so much as the research I did in the social sciences, where the idea of the teachers was that we need to set the frame for the kids, because what the kids will focus on is too micro level, and they're not yet at the level yet where they can really genuinely dialogue about something. So what we need to do is give them the official endpoint to sort of get them to move to the next level. It's this kind of logic that I see here.
In what, Mark? In the first or the second?
Encouraged to begin to experiment with official discourse, as if they're not capable of doing that yet without the direct guidance of the teacher's explicit questioning and forming the entire discourse in a way that the argument here is that kids are not capable of engaging in dialogue on genuine academic problems. That's the impression that I get.
But my impression, Mark, is that they are criticizing the practice in this school.
No, they're criticizing the practice, but what they propose, Tina, is it's very oppressive as well. They criticize that. That's true. Look about this allowed and even encouraged. Do you see that power? Right, the teacher has power to allow. I'm allowing you.
How you mean like that?
And not even encouraged. Wow.
Yeah, I see now. Was it that, Mark? You mean that?
Yeah, because the idea being that anything the kids would focus on would be so small and not very, and focused on let's say microscopic things, as opposed to real issues. And you see that a little bit in the examples that they gave about the flood. The kids are talking about hurricanes, but hurricanes aren't really floods. Yeah, they kind of are, actually. I was really puzzled by that.
Me too.
No, Eugene and Mark, hurricane's about wind, flood is about
water. Mark, right.
Anyone who's been in a hurricane will tell you that it's very much about floods.
By the way, this is it's concrete thinking, Mark. It's not conceptual thinking. Those people need to be educated. They're wrong.
That's right.
Because they cannot conceptualize correctly. It's about wind. They think it's about water. They're drowning in the water, but they're wrong.
That's right.
Of the wind, and not water. What is innocent here?
Plus, did you notice at the very beginning of the article when they say, or the case, that the teacher had some text that they would read together, but before that text, she wanted to set up their better understanding of
activation of prior knowledge, Anna, it's called.
Yes.
You need to activate prior knowledge.
For her, prior knowledge was just these flash floods in desert. Hurricanes don't play any, or tsunamis.
Or snow, or melting snow also. That's not a flood. You think it's flood. People think that they dying of flood. No, they dying of the snow, of melted snow. That's not a flood. And desert, that's another story. That's a very.
But I mean, interesting data to have. I think it's a good idea to present this data and these dialogues. But
What do
how
you
to
mean?
present them?
What do you mean?
I mean, it's not wrong from the authors to bring it up, how they talk. But I think the framing is very limited here, how they discuss. And as you said, Eugene, it's very functional and also positivistic. They are. Did you notice that? No, they have frequencies in. Is it hand raising or such participatory?
Yeah, and I also feel that there's this kind of Vygotskian appropriation argument in there. You know, that that somehow that if children are allowed to are given the opportunity, allowed and encouraged, as we say, to participate in experimenting with ideas, then they will appropriate the official discourses of the teaching. I think that's really what it is, and and unfortunately the Vygotskian argument is clothed in this Bakhtinian voice stuff. But I'm not so sure that that's even helpful for their argument. I think it would be better for them just to stick with the Vygotskian stuff.
Exactly, I agree with
that. But sorry, but do we understand it correctly? But because I think that they need to experiment in order to find another discourse.
No. At the end of the day, they wanted students to believe what culture wants them to believe, but it will be there.
Yeah, but here
they can prove for themselves that it's true. Not because authority said that, but because it's rational.
Yeah. It's like Rupert wants children or students to join the big dialogue. The mediation that Vygotsky developed, it was exactly how to make people come into the culture that already exists, into the big dialogue of the humanity. And that's Rupert's idea. You don't have your own voice before you can join this big dialogue. And they are struggling here with seeing that the voice is somehow important, and that's why they say, is it Vygotskian mediation or some kind of like
there is something that
they can
you are right.
They can feel this tension, but they constantly move away from it, you know.
I agree. It's a little bit, but I think they are trying to move in because they said that they want the student to struggle against the official discourse, and I think they want to move in a, but there is something wrong. I know in their way of reasoning.
You know,
I'm not sure they wanted to struggle. I think they're looking for the ideal technique.
Yep.
That's my impression. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the impression I get, that if only we had the right ground rules, as we talked about earlier, and the right techniques.
The right ground rules for voice is you also have to heed the voice. So in a way, that's where they use Himes, because he was talking about Native Alaskan people who were misunderstood with the white people and then constantly reinterpreted in the bad way. And he uses that example. They use that example to say how the teacher does not heed the voice. So they just think that if the teacher would acknowledge these children's voices in their own right, that would become dialogue.
And that's why they're concerned about the kid's voice going into the underlife. I think there's some kind of sense that they feel that there's a lot of missing voice in the students' interpretation of the classroom discourse, and that it gets pushed out of the extracurricular. And our goal is to try to bring back the relevant voice of the students into the classroom context. But unfortunately, like we were talking about earlier, I'm not sure they understand that there's nothing really to dialogue here. Dialogue's not really legitimate in the examples that they're providing.
What students for real would be thinking about floods in some kind of like genuine context, then you don't need the rules. It would be just like, wow, something happened to you in a flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, let's consider the rules, because I really like to think about, about the idea of the rule is to eliminate judgment, human judgment. Because in this case, you follow the rule and you don't need to think about it. It's like shortcut. You know, the scientist will think for you and they develop already answer, well thought answer. And you as a teacher don't need to think about that. So look at this rule on page number 6 about a voice is about being heard. Anna, for you it may be page 5, but maybe 6.
It's at the beginning of the page 6. We are close, but not completely.
Yeah.
Voice is about.
Can you read something there?
Yeah, voice is about. This is on for us except Anna. Anna already found that, but for Mark, for you, and for Tina, this is the second full paragraph. Starting voice is about. It's in italics. Did you find that?
Yeah.
Or I can just listen to you if you want to read it.
No. Feel free to. They want to read it.
About being heeded. Voice is about being heeded.
Yeah, I see it. Yep.
Yeah, voice is relational. We express our voices in order to be heard and attended to, in order to participate in conversation. Dismissing, ignoring, or otherwise not engaging with somebody's voice is another way of silencing it. Alexander, 2008, page 104, approvingly quotes Bakhtin, 1986, which is speech genres, page 168, in this regard. If an answer does not give rise to a new question from itself, then it falls out of the dialogue. And we can continue that, but in my view, this is very hugely problematic. Because so what it goes out of dialogue? That's fine.
Well,
and this is, by the way, what Bakhtin means also, in my view. Maybe I'm wrong. It's not everything. Like, by the way, if we are following that rule, nothing will be stopped. Because on everything you have to reply. Everything was said. Where is the freedom of the people? Maybe I'm not interested in what, I don't know, Tina is saying, or Mark's saying, or why I should reply to that? Where is my kind of agency about that? Why everything should be replied?
That's true. And earlier, the quote from Bakhtin, 1981, gives people an option on page 5. In the quote that they bring in from Bakhtin, talking about internally persuasive discourse, they even here state, along with the rejection of those congeries of discourse that do not matter to us, that do not touch us. So there's that element right there. They brought it up.
Because not everything touches us.
Yeah.
But from their point of view, of course, it's not about touching, right? Because that's why it's not important. Touching is not important. It's just like talk. The production of the talk that's important in the classroom.
But at the same time, I think they are ambivalent. Let's say that. I mean,
ambivalent. No, they're not ambivalent. This is the rule. What do you mean ambivalent? This is the.
I mean the whole article. If you look at the whole text.
No, they're not ambivalent about that. I don't see any ambivalence. They want rules. They ignoring that part of the.
But not talk. Okay, perhaps you're right with rules, but I mean they are explicitly.
No, think about that. They want first of all talk, and then shaping it, and then shaping that. What they problematize is shaping, but they want talk. They want to produce a lot of talk.
You think that?
Absolutely. This is, look at this. Last sentence of the article. The talk is good. The rules of the talk is good. We just need to add now rules for the. There's no ambivalence about that. It's true that not any talk is good, but the talk is absolutely necessary.
But in my mind, when I read it, at least, I interpreted it like an inspiration for, okay, that they are, the message for me was that kind of thinking deeper about the meaning of talk and not necessarily talking. I mean, I think That was, I mean, with ambivalence, because they have a message clearly that is.
I think you're reading, or I can hear you, Tina, but I think you're reading what's not an article, but what in your head, which is, indeed, this article can generate ambivalence in you, but it's not ambivalence in the authors. I don't see it.
But isn't it the whole message is that?
The whole message, there is no ambivalence. They're telling us what to do. Where is the ambivalence? They're telling us what to do. Use new
isn't that important?
But there is not ambivalence. What is ambivalence?
It's not about we need to have rules. If we look at the abstract and I will just see if
we need rules for the voice now, and they providing us. This is what one rule on the previous page. There is another one. There are several rules for the voice. You need to be heeded. Another one, rules should be, they put it in italics in order to show that this is a rule. Super important. Voice is speaking on its own terms. This is a rule.
They just, if you read really the last paragraph, the whole paragraph, for instance, they say, we are left with questions that would benefit from the further research attention. One relates to the expansion of students' linguistic repertoires through the appropriation of official voices. What are some possible stages in this appropriation process? And under what conditions are academic discourse and conditions for student voice most compatible or incompatible? They just have to find. They don't know exactly what these finesse is, but they just have to make possible to find more exact, more precise ways to do that. Another issue pertains to the epistemic underpinning of the various competing practices surrounding student voice. What are the implicit claims about the nature and sources of knowledge, and so on? So they just think that we are not yet developed our scientific knowledge about dialogue well, so we cannot precisely give the rules to the teachers or describe this ideal dialogue. If we could, we need to do that so that we can give this recipe.
Yeah.
But if we're looking in the abstract, I mean, the main message is not about, they are not mention rules. They are talking about, they are cherishing, and what do you say? The word cherish? Caring for students' independent own voices. So that's the, I mean.
Only carry it only in order to do good appropriation will happen.
Yeah.
But they are criticizing Vygotskian appropriation, at least.
No, they don't.
No,
they do. They try to.
Where?
But Mark, wasn't you also?
No, Mark criticized them. Not you're missing Mark point, I think. Mark didn't criticize. Mark talking about them, not about saying that.
Yeah, I don't see any critique of Vygotsky here.
But you mentioned it before. Earlier, Mark, in this
article. I guess what I'm kind of what I was saying was I was concerned that they're kind of use their own language. They're appropriating Bakhtin who talk about Vygotsky, a Vygotskian idea. But I'm not so sure that they even. I actually was saying I don't even think they need Bakhtin to do that. I don't.
No. Let me provide a picture that emerging, and Mark, check if you will agree or not, because this is coming from. I'm actually summarizing you. Basically, they're Vygotskians. It's about the idea how to do correct appropriation, genuine appropriation. And for that, they use dialogue as a tool for the good appropriation. And they're trying to develop this idea of instrumental dialogue because it's instrument for right appropriation, genuine appropriation. And this is where, this is what the whole endeavor is, in my view.
On my page 4, there is a paragraph like this. While teachers' requests for student reproduction of official voices are usually readily identifiable, the question of what constitutes an authentic student voice is tricky, since the boundaries between one's own and another's voice are not at all clear-cut. Moreover, appropriating the voices of teacher or textbook, i.e. developing an academic voice, is an important educational aim. how can we distinguish between Vygotsky mediation and monologic silencing? Bakhtin's work on the inherent dialogicity of language is helpful for thinking through this issue. So they want to keep with Vygotsky mediation. That would not be.
Yeah.
They're keeping Vygotsky goal with kind of Bakhtinian means.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is what they're trying to do.
And then I agree with you, Mark, that they don't.
Well, and they're using this most conservative idea of Bakhtin, this notion that our voice is one half one and one half another person, which it's not. That sounds like Jim Wersch argument from way back in the early 90s, and it doesn't seem to really capture the essence of Bakhtin in terms of dialogicity. It just seems to be like this notion that I can appropriate someone else's voice and use it as my own, and then that's why they brought up the authoritative versus internally persuasive discourse argument. I was a little bit trying to think of something else that I wanted to say about that, but it's not coming to me at the moment. Sorry, not coming to me at the moment. This notion of
they do also a lot of stuff that they later on in their analysis is not at all taken up. Like, for instance, they continue this same argument that I read about, and then they say, hence Bakhtin writes this: our speech is filled of overflowing with other people's words, and the word of language is half someone else. In that case, what could speaking in one's own authentic voice mean? And Bakhtin describes the becoming of individual consciousness as a site of intense struggle between others' voice and our own, between authoritative discourse and the such that of the church or the state or the school that is imposed upon us from without, and internally persuasive discourse. But later on in their analysis, there is absolutely no taking up this. Like they do see that the students interanimate the teacher's voice, but they are not taking up anything from that in the further analysis for their own further thinking of what would be even their approach to understanding what's going on.
But that's the problem. The problem is this notion of taking up. I guess that's what I get stuck there every time I hear that, because it's this notion of appropriation again. So it's not a discursive understanding of dialogue. So I'm like the way I see that is if I'm a student and my job is to appropriate the language of flooding. So I'm kind of like a sponge, I guess. Maybe not a complete sponge, because I have my own ideas.
That's a good
but,
Are you sure?
So I'm an exuberant sponge, maybe. A sponge that, like, I don't know, periodically picks up other ideas and tries to interanimate the voice. But when it comes down to it, what I'm really supposed to absorb is the definition of flooding.
Exactly, the conceptual.
You should accept that in an honest way. It's a very progressive idea, again, that at the end of the day, all students should arrive to the same thing what society wants them to arrive, but in an honest way.
And it might be different from one person to another, right? And that's okay.
And it's even more oppressive, isn't it? That's more oppressive. We had that discussion in Sweden. You know, they are assessed on what they are thinking, but they should think according to certain values. That's super oppressive.
You can, it's like, remember this T-model, Jerry Ford, not Jerry Ford, the Ford, you can have whatever color of the car as soon as it is black. You can choose.
Model T, the Ford Model T,
yeah, you can have any color, but it should be black.
Yeah. You can like the Trabant in East Germany. You get any color that comes off the factory that day.
You can choose. You have freedom to decide, but it will be black.
It's really
Right.
By the way, this is what I struggle, Tina, as well, because they proposed in a way softer version of monologism. This is not dialogic. It's dialogic.
No.
But is it softer, or is it the softer version less oppressive? This is a good question to ask. Or is it actually more oppressive? Because
perhaps.
it's softer, it makes many things invisible and convinced people that they really choose that. This is there. So that's the oppression is less visible than in a hard version of monologism.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's, the pressure is very visible for the students.
Right.
Exactly.
Less visible.
Not heteroglossia, but monoglossia. If it's not, it is monologism, but through monoglossia, through these Alexander rules that they don't know. So the voice is on topic. It is cumulative, staying on topic. It's heated if it's heard, but no heteroglossia whatsoever.
And it's interesting too to think about the student discourse that examples in this text, because it's not an easy task. It's not an easy skill to learn how to do this well. You know, a lot of the kids are failing at this.
How to manipulate well, right? You mean like
say again?
You're basically saying when you say how to do it well, it means how to manipulate well. So
how to say what the teacher wants me to say in my own voice, but still say what the teacher wants me to say, and not go off in a direction that's not off script, as Mary Kennedy talks about. Not go too far off script, but at the same time bring in something that will explain what the teacher wants to explain. I mean, it's interesting how there's only one kid that was really successful in doing that out of all the kids that are mentioned in the text.
Which shows that hard monologism is more effective.
Right.
You know,
or that this is a way of sorting people to make who's successful in doing it.
Test at the end of the day, so we know what flat is, because according to the definition, flat is when there is a lot of rain coming in the desert. This is the flat.
Overflowing over the banks.
Yes.
Of the desert, which is it's interesting when the desert has banks, right? Overflowing the desert banks, whatever it means.
It does kind of.
Go on, Mark.
Oh, I just was saying it does kind of. It's kind of interesting though, how, like, you know, if you're a child who genuinely thinks there's a dialogue going on there, you could be so confused.
Yeah.